So good evening or good morning or hello everybody. My name is Hannes Wertner and I welcome you as the host of this third workshop on digital humanism. And now we have the focus on strategies for a humanistic future or humanistic digital future. To the background of this workshop, just as a short introduction, digital humanism looks at the interplay of man-machine or as adversaries of the co-evolution. And with this, it also recognizes the fundamental role of IT in informatics in our society. IT acts quasi, as I say, as an operating system of our society. And as an example, take the Corona crisis. Without our infrastructure and tools, we could not work, we could not teach, we couldn't do the learning. And we wouldn't have been able to have this super fast research in medicine. But at the same time, we have several critical issues. We have concentration, monopolies in the web. We have the issue of sovereignty and the roles of state. This is especially true for Europe. We have echo chambers, fake news, and what is the relationship to democracy and free speech? What is the role of humans in AI and decision-making, privacy, automation, and the future of work? So these are all critical issues, and these observations led us to the organization of the first workshop we had in April 2019 here in Vienna, where several of you participated, and also the resulting Vienna Manifesto on digital humanism, which is now available in 7 different languages. And there we laid down also key principles for a future digital and also just society. There we also say that digital humanism doesn't only look and analyze this interplay, but it also acts. It is a call for action to intervene and to interfere on all different levels. So in this third workshop, we look at possible action strategies in some key areas as they are written down in the program, in education, in AI, specifically in Europe, and resilience and sustainability issues. And the last workshop tomorrow, we have invited several international initiatives to discuss with them possible overlaps and joint frameworks where we could cooperate. A little side remark, I think we have, with our initiatives, been quite successful in the last 1.5 years. We had 3 workshops already. We had 7 panels and talks, and you can look at all those at our Digital Humanism channel, which is in YouTube, and also at our website. So it's a long history and a short history. It's very often in computer science, long and short are somehow interwoven here. Before we start, and I hand over to the first panel, I would really like to thank you, the speakers and panelists. In total, we have 14 of you, and I thank you for your participation. I thank the 4 moderators, Enrico, George, Sally, and Carlo, for organizing these 4 panels and having contact with the speakers. I also would like to thank the members of our international program committee for this digital humanism lecture series. But I also want to thank the staff here at the Faculty of Informatics at TU Wien. Without them, it would not have been possible to do all those things. And I want to mention that they do this in addition to the normal scientific work of teaching, research, and some administration. To the structure, we have 4 panels, each of them 75 minutes, including discussion, and then we have 15 minutes break, and then the second panel starts each day at 5:30 p.m. We have each day we end with a piece of music. This time it's really played by Erich Brehm. He's member of our program committee. And he's one of the few guys who studied philosophy and computer science. So he's both a computer scientist and philosopher. And he's also an artist, which you will listen and hear today. Now I would like to hand over to Enrico and his 3 panelists. And I thank them, Randy, Lorella, and Johanna, for their participation. Just introducing Enrico. He is a professor of informatics at the University Tor Vergata in Rome. He's also president of Informatics Europe. This is an association of over 150 informatics departments and faculties in Europe. And he is also very active in Italian programs to introduce informatics in the Italian schools in the curriculum. There he's not only doing research, but also doing practical work. And before that, he was also active in algorithm databases, but also in geographical information systems and HCI. And he's active that he has to be as president of Informatic Europe in dissemination activities and spreading information about the role of informatics in our digital society. Having said this, I hand over to Enrico, and I'm looking forward to your interesting panel. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Hannes. And I will say a few words to introduce the panel, and then I will give the floor in turn to each of them. So as you have understood from the introduction of the context of Digital Humanism workshop, you may understand that education is an important element within this scenario. So the idea of this panel is to start a reflection on whether we need to change somehow the content of informatics education. And I have been telling within my community, I've been discussing with my colleagues since many, many years now, that probably we should prepare students for their future work by providing them the attitude of a medical doctor who has her feet well rooted in science and technology, but whose ultimate goal is to heal and ensure the well-being of people. And this does not imply to renounce to prepare them as engineers, which translate specification into systems that work according to the plan because they are based on science. But this implies that more and more of these systems are of an interdisciplinary nature, and therefore our students have to be educated, have to appreciate issues that go beyond traditional area of informatics. And this will be discussed within this panel, and this apply probably not only to higher education, to the students we have in our classrooms, but in general to school education and to education to every citizen. How can we prepare the everyday citizen to understand the impact of informatics in the world, how the digital technologies are changing the world, if they do not understand the science, the constraints, and their constraints and their effect. So the panel will debate this issue from 3 different viewpoints. And without further ado, I will now introduce Randy Connolly, which is professor in the Department of Mathematics and Computing at the Mount Royal University in Calgary, Canada, where he also teaches in the General Education Department. And he has a background both in computer science and in political science. Therefore, his research has oscillated between these 2 fields, and his teaching specialties are web development and technology and society studies. He has authored 3 textbooks used by thousands of students in over 100 universities worldwide. Earlier this year, Randy wrote a paper for Communication of the ACM with a very stimulating title, which is Why Computing Belongs Within the Social Sciences. And this title and the content resonated with my view of informatics as medicine that I described earlier. So I found that these ideas and these approaches were highly in tune with the Digital Humanism Manifesto, and therefore, together with his research interest in the social effects of computing, I think this makes him the perfect speaker to open this panel. So Randy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, everything seems to be, oh, sorry, I forgot to share the screen. A blip already. There we go. Now this should be sharing. So I had to shorten the title a little bit, and as Enrico has indicated, I am going to be talking about why computing should be a social science. And I do have a background in both political science and computer science. I often talk about computer science because that's typically the term in North America, but I guess informatics is going to be a little more common, a term in Europe. So let's get started. My apologies for speaking very fast, but here it goes. So I want to begin back in, this is a picture of Alan Greenspan, the chair of the Federal Reserve in the United States, back in 2008, when he was testifying before Congress in the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis. And really the high point, I think, in the proceedings was when he was pressed to admit that your view of the world, your ideology, it wasn't right. And, and Greenspan admitted, he said, absolutely, precisely. Well, fast forward 10 years to another sort of famous mea culpa moment in front of Congress, Mr. Zuckerberg, right, in 2018, in light of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Russian interference in the election, he also admitted to wrong, right? But as far as mea culpas goes, Greenspan's was a lot more concise and insightful to the root of the problem. It wasn't the problem of users or license agreements or rogue developers. He recognized that the problem lay in a worldview that kind of worked until it didn't. What I found interesting was that in the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis, there were calls for reforms within university programs themselves. It was thought that the kind of unrealistic models and assumptions within economic departments and business schools were also partly responsible for the crisis. Well, I think it's time for us to have our own road to Damascus moment. It's time for us in computing to also kind of critically interrogate the worldview of academic computing. So let me give you the elevator pitch for the rest of the talk in a couple of slides. The well-publicized social ills of computing are not going to just disappear by simply adding in ethics instructions or code of conduct, right? The remedy, I think, to these problems facing computing don't so much lie in philosophy, but lie in the marketplace. They lie in the fields such as sociology, psychology, anthropology, and political science. Okay. Why is that the case? Well, it's because, as I'm going to argue, computing as a discipline is becoming progressively more and more entangled within the human and the social life world. Thus, computing as an academic discipline needs to move further and further away from kind of engineering-inspired curricular models and move towards and adopt the analytic lenses supplied by social sciences. Okay, so that's what I'm going to spend my remaining 12 minutes talking about. So I want to begin by talking about academic computing's worldview. Now, computing, like any academic discipline, has maybe somewhat arbitrary intellectual demarcations, right? But as a new field, it initially laid out a set of kind of markers, if you will, to distinguish it from mathematics and engineering. Perhaps the most important of these markers was computing's sort of unique disciplinary way of thinking, what by the 1990s was sometimes labeled as computational thinking. Within academia, computing and computational thinking has followed an expansionist arc since the 1990s. And indeed, by the end of the 1990s, you would see claims that kind of boiled down to something that looked like this, that computational thinking provides a methodologically superior set of techniques that can be applied universally and supply truth propositions that are kind of unblemished by past history or social institutions, by the human psychology or the antiquated theories that others used. Well, other disciplines, as part of that kind of narrative, have been continuously encouraged to embrace computational approaches. Well, as a political scientist, partially, I was always amazed that the reverse was rarely advocated. And indeed, I think this triumphalist, almost quasi-colonizing mentality is at least partly to blame for computing's current fraught relationship with other societal actors. So instead of replacing social science approaches, I think academic computing would be immeasurably improved by supplementing its own methods and approaches with those of the social sciences. Okay, supplementing. So let's go on and take a look at the, what do I think of when I'm talking about the social sciences? Well, look, within the natural and engineering sciences, the predictability of its subjects can generally be assumed, and thus a single methodological approach for making knowledge claims is possible. But the human and social systems are much more complex and less predictable. And as a consequence, methodological and theoretical pluralism really characterizes the social sciences. This embrace of complexity is a key insight that we need to import into academic computing, I feel. As computing interacts more and more with the human and the social life world, we need to use the approaches and ideas that have already been established over the past century of social science research. So what I want to do is I want to talk about 3 recommendations that are in my paper, and we are going to talk about them for transforming computing education, because that's really my interest, is what can we do as educators to improve things. And first off, computing really needs to divest itself of its kind of colonizing mentality towards other disciplines, and to instead recognize that theoretic frameworks from outside computing have value and would indeed improve computing. Now, in the light of one of the most keen criticisms I received after publishing the article was people in HCI, and HCI is already there in a sense. It's time, but it's time for the rest of computing to catch up to HCI. So, yeah. So take, for instance, I don't know, the subfield of data science, right? Data science has been really good at identifying patterns in heterogeneous data sets, right? Data science tells us that there's a few ducks here that have life preservers, but it doesn't really tell us why only this one duck has one. That is, to explain patterns and correlations, that requires social theory. It requires contextual knowledge, right? A better understanding of human psychology, social power, and the economic incentive structures in society may have allowed us to avoid some of the social technical problems we face today, right? Think about the lack of deep security measures in the internet, the initial internet protocols, right? I think it betrayed a kind of hopeful and naive understanding of human motivation held by the early pioneers of the internet. Our current legitimation crises facing democracies today is at least partly a consequence of the social fragmentation, which was enabled by digital platforms, right? Digital platforms created by programmers with a minimalist understanding of what new communication modalities can do to an unprepared audience. Consider as well the relatively newfound appreciation within AI research about how pre-existing human biases can pollute the training data used within machine learning, right? Well, perhaps a lot less surprise would have been encountered had those working with AI been required to take, say, a course in anthropology. For almost 50 years, the most introductory anthropological training has endeavored to instill a recognition that cultural differences and perceptions of otherness biases the observations of researchers. And yet in AI research, it's only a relatively recent thing to recognize this fact. Why? Well, I think it's partly because of an institutional blindness to the accumulated insights of really a century of social research. So for too long within computing, I think we've tended to instead rely on kind of pop culture theories about the inevitable technology-driven social progress that really painted an attractive and self-satisfied veneer over our work. Moving forward, we need to do better, right? We need to be willing to inform both our work and our thinking with the more nuanced, historically grounded, empirically supported, century-old research tradition of the social sciences. So the best way to achieve my first recommendation is my second one, right? Modestly reduce the number of computing courses in our programs in order to accommodate some mandatory social science courses. The official ACM and IEEE curricular recommendations need to do this as well. They need to acknowledge that computing graduates need to do more than just computing and mathematics courses. Well, they have, for instance, in the ACM recommendation, they recommend an ethics course, right? But this isn't enough. Our graduates' worldview must broaden. We must do so to recognize how computing is both impacting and being impacted by political, social, economic, and cultural institutions, right? And this means we need to do more than simply teach deontological versus utilitarian algorithms for ethical trolley problems. It's a good start, but it's too individualistic oriented. It's just a start, right? My third recommendation is we need to embrace multidisciplinarity through faculty hiring, right? Well, porous edges, I think, are better than sharp boundaries when it comes to broad and relatively new academic disciplines such as communications and computer science or informatics. And indeed, to take a metaphor from ecology, ecological edges are zones where ecosystems overlap. And interestingly, it's where biodiversity and biodensity are much higher. They're higher on the edges than in the central areas of any one ecosystem. There's a saying that there's more songbirds at the edge of forests than in the middle. That's what computing needs as an academic discipline. We need to participate in the rich academic biodiversity where computing overlaps with other disciplines. To help reach these rich edges, we need to hire more instructors or professors or whatever your institute calls these people into computing departments who are specialists in the human and social side of computing. So, oh, actually, I just wanted to say one more thing. We don't need to limit ourselves to computer science PhDs here. There are communications, sociology, law, psychology, anthropology, and other PhDs out there whose dissertation topics are clearly computing related or even computational in an approach. We need to consider bringing them into our computer science faculty. So in conclusion, computing professionals and academics have helped create something truly awesome over the past half century. And awesome is truly the appropriate word, especially if we're cognizant of its etymological heritage. The word awesome, in fact, is derived from the ancient Greek word dianon. And this word captures better the full dimensions of computing's awesomeness. To be dianon is to be both wondrous and terrifying at the same time. In Sophocles' Antigone, the famous Ode to Man says that man is the most dianon creature, both wondrous and terrifying. Within computing, we've tended to focus only on the wondrous, and we've kind of either ignored the terrifying or delegated its reporting to other disciplines. We must be willing to face this dianon reality of the future. We need to embrace our responsibility as computing professionals to change and renew our curriculum and the worldview that it propagates. We've been given this task by history, and this is how the future is going to judge us. Thank you. This is the paper that Enrico is kind enough to mention. Whew, 30 seconds to spare.
Yeah, okay. So thanks, Randy. Really thanks. This very wonderful and provocative introduction. I mean, some of the things you said made me shake a little bit, even if I share some of your approach. But okay, we will see in the discussion. Now it's time to introduce the second speaker, Joanna Seibt. which is professor for philosophy at Aarhus University in Denmark and director of the research unit for robophilosophy, which is also a conference series, and integrative social robotics, an approach she has developed to organize research and development processes in social robotics so as to include humanities expertise, with the goal of creating culturally sustainable and responsible social robotics application. Convinced that social technologies are best developed in interdisciplinary teams, Joanna is currently exploring how the insight of the integrative social robotics paradigm can be translated into new educational approaches that can provide future professional informatics and other social science and humanities disciplines with those competencies needed to participate in these interdisciplinary developer teams. She therefore is the perfect speaker to go deeper in the topic of our panel. Joanna, the floor is yours.
So I hope that everything is visible. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am going to follow up on pretty much everything that Randy has said, but with a focus on a dimension of computing that few computer scientists as such think right now immediately about, namely the embodied, the use of AI in embodiments and robotic embodiments. So we have been since 2014 run the so-called RoboPhilosophy conference series in order to alert our colleagues in the humanities in particular that there are new and very pressing tasks for humanities scholars. So what I want to go through with you in the next 15 minutes is a very simple line of thought. First claim is that the technologies we produce for our immediate future may have profound negative effects on aspects of our social worlds that are particularly valuable. We see at the moment that social media have rather unexpected effects on very basic elements of our social world. We talk about currently an erosion of the very foundations of democracy, having to do with the concept of truth and fact, and also political deliberation. My next point will be that engineers, as they are currently educated, are not equipped to fulfill these new responsibilities that are arising with the new type of technologies that we are creating. And then I will quickly present how we are currently in Aarhus here try to approach the problem as I will set it out. And my conclusion will be that we need to create permeable educations. You will see in a moment why I'm not going to advocate educations where multiple competences, cross competences are literally created in the course of the education, but rather where students begin their education with a view to becoming members of an interdisciplinary team. Okay, let us start out. One can say the characteristic human way of interacting with the world is to changes based on counterfactual imagination. And that's the essence of technology, and it's also the essence of art, one might claim. Each tech normally we would put on here for the purpose of human survival and comfort. But during the last decades, we have begun something else. Each age has its signature technology. And it appears that the signature technology for the next decades of the 21st century will be automation. You probably all have seen the projections for the profound changes that this will create within our workplace. There have been some anticipations of the socio-political repercussions that this might have. But we tend at the moment to conceive of automation on the foil of cultural imaginaries that sort of look like that picture. We are still fully in control and we have technology at our fingertips. The world is something that we regiment and control. We get from economic institutes like McKinsey the reassuring message. I don't know what kind of data went into that statement, that the ability of technology to disrupt is nothing new and its influence is overwhelmingly positive. So policymakers take the bearing from statements like that with, I would say, rather dubious historical sources. What we are dealing with in the future, what we will be dealing with, comes out in the following pictures. Look at these kinds of artifacts and look at pictures like these displaying what appears to be genuine emotional involvement of people with machines that are programmed to behave as if they are social agents. In fact, Sintra Basile, who is often presented as the protagonist of social robotics, formulated the overarching design strategy of social robotics as follows. She said, in reference to her robot Kismet, people will treat Kismet as if it were a socially aware creature with thoughts, intents, desires, and feelings. Believability is the goal, realism is not necessary. So here we have a whole industry creating a future industry, an industry that has begun to pick up, but certainly is largely in the future, although the robotics market is projected to take off rather rapidly now. Creating artifacts that are designed to affect what one could call the social brain, that is the part of our brain that does pre-conscious processing of socially relevant information. So as has been during the past decade or so investigated, robots indeed can affect low-level mechanisms that are at the medium level, and certainly also those brain regions that incline us to ascribe an intentional stance, sort of to take the intentional stance, as this is put, that is to ascribe intentions and feelings, beliefs, intentions, and feelings to these machines. Interestingly, human-robot interaction research, a discipline that exists for about 14 years now, has studied the extent to which people are willing to not only take the intentional stance, but also immediately to consider the new type of social agent, or as if social agent they're interacting with as moral agents. So here you have a picture from an experiment by Peter Kahn from 2012, where humans quite readily lied to another human being in order to protect a robot they had interacted with before for 15 minutes. Sherry Turkle wrote a beautiful book in 2012 with, she anticipates the possibly profound negative effects of the increased and ubiquitous use of social agents that sort of are friends that we make, in a sense of making friends that we haven't tried out before, where we control the extent of variation in reactions. And given on her, based on her research, she is shocked by the fact that the performance of connections seems in many cases connection enough. So she talks about the time right now, these first decades of the 21st century, to be the robotic moment, that moment in sociocultural history where we need to contemplate how we will receive social robots, since that will also tell us something about who we are right now, but in particular also who we are willing to become. So engineers are facing, this is the next line now, to the extent that they are engaged in particular in social robotics, where AI techniques are used in order to create the illusions, but partly also the competences of a social agent. They are moving into a completely new type of space of responsibility. A picture like this, I think, conveys in itself which cultures are clashing here. The simulation of social agency is tightly connected with the simulation of emotional connectedness, and that in turn has a tight linkage to moral standing of an artifact as either moral agent or moral patient. So what we find and need to work against is what I call the competence illusion. Even though engineers working in social robotics and computer scientists have the best of intentions, there is a misunderstanding about how competence as a participant translates into research competence, and that in turn into competence in evaluating what is still responsible and otherwise irresponsible development of technology. Social actions are actions in a symbolic space, and that simple message is something that we in our research unit have been trying for the last 6 years to convey. But it is a message that is difficult to convey. I said that engineers believe often that their normative competence and their agentive competence is enough to develop applications that comply with our sociocultural norms and with our ethical norms included. At the same time, the current investigative tools that social roboticists use right now are not sufficiently discriminative. The more we create technology that interferes with the space of human social cultural agency directly as presenting itself as a social agent, the more we need the expertise of the humanities. So what we have been engaged with is developing a type of new paradigm for, on the one hand, research, but also the development of social robotics applications, where we integrate many different disciplines in order to create, in the research design and development process, culturally, in order to create a development process that ends up with a culturally sustainable product. In particular, we argue that integrating humanities expertise at the very beginning is a matter of scientific rationality, since in this way we can create more precise description and evaluations of human-robot interactions. On the other hand, it's also a matter of practical rationality, because social robotics, but also many other applications using AI, are at the moment caught in the Collingridge dilemma. We create technologies, the consequences of which we can only access at a time when it is too late to extract these technologies from society. So we need also the normative competences of the humanities in order to build in some anticipatory internal regulation by value-driven design.
Sorry, Joanna, 2 minutes to go.
2 minutes to go. So in order to resolve this gridlock, our program of integrative social robotics suggests a re-visualization here, bringing in essence, the humanities at the very early in the process, and in particular having value deliberations infusing the entire development process. What does that mean for educations? Well, interestingly, according to our experiences, on the one hand, the principles that we have developed for how to create culturally sustainable social robotics applications can be exported to other types of technology. But we also, I think, can argue that students, given that the competences that are needed are rich, we cannot build, we've really tried that, we cannot build educations that reduce the competences in each discipline. So all that we can try to do is create interfaces so that students become competent members of interdisciplinary teams, but they need to be fully trained within the methodologies of their own discipline. And it needs a different mindset and interfaces, but not completely new educations that would, in particular, lower the methodological standards of each of the involved disciplines. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna, for being perfectly on time and for this description of a scenario that reminds me the science fiction books I was reading when I was younger. Indeed, it's becoming a reality, and the issue of social robotics is really important. So it's now the time to introduce the third speaker, Lorella Zanardo, who is an activist for human rights and social justice. She is the author of the project Face Manifesto, a 10-point manifesto aiming at stimulating emotional and physical awareness about the importance of our faces in the current digital society. In a previous life, she held senior executive positions in a major international organization and currently is a member of the WIN Advisory Board, an international organization of female professionals based in Oslo. Her current focus is the education of teenagers and citizens in general on the use of images and media, which in the digital society play a role more important than ever as an essential tool to reclaim active citizenship. With her broader focus on education for all citizens, I think she is the perfect closure for this panel. Lorella, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Enrico, and good afternoon to everybody. Being media educator and media watcher, together with my team, we analyze every week hundreds of images, and therefore we have realized that the human face is undergoing profound transformations. That's why we felt the urgency to create a Volto Manifesto, a face manifesto, a manifesto about our face. We will share with you our reflections. From the heavy use of photo retouching on social networks and in advertising to influencers whose digital appearance is very similar to real individuals, and to androids with anthropomorphic features and with artificial intelligence, as the one you showed us before. All these phenomena have brought to everyone's private and social life daily encounters with artificial faces. So we have asked ourselves, which are the repercussions of the ongoing transformation on interpersonal relationship and society? How these artificial faces are influencing young people who often do not realize anymore the difference between a real face with its humanity and a fake one. Just a second, because we had another video. Yes. Which are the consequences on our lives when we meet, when we encounter these faces? Will the disappearance of the face of the old people, we only see young people, also in the images you showed us, we only saw young faces young android faces or young human faces? And will the disappearance of the face of the old people be without consequences for our communities? We seldom see an android or a digital human with an old face. In a transformation of such magnitude, other important elements come into play. One is the ancient dream of creating fellow human beings, capable of emulating us and perhaps of offering a continuation to our species, giving life to intelligent beings and potentially able of consciousness and emotion. Another element is the contemporary standard of beauty. And I invite you to follow my suggestion that this is a very important issue, perhaps the most important, marked by strong stereotyped tendencies that push towards the homologation of individual features. In a present time dominated by digital relationships based on images, deviating from these canons can lead to exclusion, loneliness, and fear. So this one is an interesting experiment done by the photographer John Rankin. Rankin asked a panel of adolescents, both boys and girls, have you seen, to modify their faces as they liked with Photoshop. So this is the result. As you can see, nearly everybody, both girls and boys, modified their face in a very similar way. So very thin face, big cheekbones, thin nose, very thin chin, big eyes like in the manga. So at the end of the experiment, Rankin asked to these boys and girls, so you prefer yourself in the way you modified yourself? And strange enough, the answer was no. I would like to stay as I am, but I have to prepare a face in order to be accepted on the social media. And the social media accept me only if I have a face like this, which means a unique face, which summarizes all the faces. So the global scale of the transformation that the face is undergoing, driven by practices such as videographics, robotics, plastic surgery. We never mentioned plastic surgery, but that's another very important modification of the face, and photoretouching requires that we ask ourselves some pressing questions. What do such artificial presences mean for our interpersonal relationships and self-perception? Sorry, just a second. What are the repercussions of the face alteration on our lives? Being it not just any part of the body, but our face is the very place that makes us unique, the part that allows us to be a person, a human being. I invite you to consider together, to make now a short experiment. I, myself, Lorella, I am presenting to you now through my face. I'm not here without a face. I'm here with my face, and I enter a relationship with you through a screen, but presenting my face. If I come closer to the camera, you can see better my features, perhaps also the wrinkles, the creases, the eyelids. And from my face, you can deduce my age, if I'm tired, perhaps the life I have had, and perhaps how do I feel. Would your perception alter if I had undergone heavy plastic surgery? Would your perception alter if I were a digital human in front of you? Would your perception be more empathic if I would be in Vienna, in present, one in front of the other, seeing each other and be in contact with each other? What does the experience of the uncanny valley teaches us? An experience that in Japan, as in Japan have proved, produces a sense of anxiety, of Unheimlichkeit, what it's not home, in those who are faced with faces that are very similar to human ones, but they are not human, such as android, videographic works, and faces that have undergone heavy plastic surgery. So what is at stake is not the free choice of individual behaviors and modifications, but the fact that such complex experiences are taking place without a widespread awareness and a shared social discussions. There is an urgent need for a renewed dialogue between aesthetics and ethics, because face, especially face, is the place where aesthetic and ethic meet. We firmly believe that we should declare face as a world heritage before it is too late. If tonight, when you go home, you could find the wonderful movie of Pierpaolo Pasolini, Il Vangelo secondo Matteo, the Gospel by San Matteo, and you would stay in front of the screen, removing the audio, and you would see for 2 hours only faces. It was shot about more than 50 years ago, and it's already changed. It has already changed a lot. If Pierpaolo Pasolini was here today, it would be impossible for him to do the same film. Already our faces look very much similar to each other. So it's high time we declare the human face a world heritage. Therefore, it's not a matter of issued judgments, but of starting an urgent reflection in light of a human face being the place where our sense of existence arises. By proposing the face as a heritage of humanity, our Voto Manifesto aims to invite everyone to join a shared collective dialogue on the uniqueness of the human face, on the digital and physical transformation that are taking place, and on the unique role that the face holds for human relationship and the ethics of society. If we destroy face, we should start to think of what will happen to ethics in society.
Lorella, yeah, sorry, can you arrive to a conclusion
yes,
so that we give...
2 minutes, I have finished. The project consists of some instruments. We have workshops for students of secondary school where we propose discussion on these points. It's in Italian, but you can read Humanity and Beyond. Is the intelligent artificial, being machine, being human, and the face as a world heritage. And then we have a video essay that will be presented on the web starting January 21st, that invites the viewer to directly face both artificially created and actually existing faces. And then we have a 10-point manifesto that you will find everything on our blog site, the Voto Manifesto, Face Manifesto, in order to offer food for thought on the key issue. You see some points are very provocative, no? Perfection is boring, and we discuss it in schools. Our face is unique. Think about the vulnerability of face, as James Hillman wrote. So we strongly believe that the uniqueness of human face should be protected. And I think the objective of our team is to reach digital humanism as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorella. Your talk has shown us how really important are these issues because they are already affecting our society. So I thank again all the speakers, and we can start the discussion. And if you have question, please raise your hand. We have a moderator that will try to regulate the traffic. And I don't know if I've seen somebody has written some very long message in the chat. I don't know if this is a question or not, Gunther. But if there is anybody else that has some question, then please raise your hand or just open the microphone and start speaking.
Enrico, I have questions to Lorella, because I found it very interesting what you have shown, and I think it's somehow also disturbing. And it's also in line with the discussion of Stuart Russell, who said we should omit robots with some human interface, human faces and things like that. But the question behind is that, isn't IT or the robot uncovering a social psychological bias we have? Isn't not the issue the IT system, but it's more the societal view on beauty and how we should look like? So we should not blame maybe the IT systems, but we should also discuss what our societal biases and points of views.
Yes, we are not criticizing the IT system, not at all, but as usual, as we are doing since 12 years, we want to raise awareness, because what we discover, especially in schools, that young people, adolescents, they are not able to recognize, for instance, real human face and digital human. And so we have the impression that we are going towards a huge change without really realizing what's happening. So we are not criticizing really IT. What we feel that it's lacking something like I'm so happy that today to be here with you, because I think it's so important to exchange opinions. as you have seen, we put together digital humans and faces which have undergone heavy plastic surgery. We are not criticizing people who do it. Of course, everybody, in our opinion, can do with their face and body whatever they wish. But it's true that when you are confronted to a person or to an android or a person who has undergone a heavy plastic surgery, you feel uncomfortable. It's a sort of uncanny valley sensation. So it's true that it's together, it's an IT problem, but also a social problem. Yes, I agree.
Okay, and I have seen there is a question also from Viola Schiaffonati. Yes, Viola.
Good afternoon. It's a question to Randy, and it's a question on why philosophy cannot provide the analytical lenses that you mentioned. I mean, ethics and philosophy are more than the trolley problem and all that stuff.
Yeah, great question. I'm not against philosophy. I mean, my PhD dissertation advisor was a philosopher, so I mean, I'm not against it. I guess what I'm trying to get at, sort of somewhat provocatively, was that in the North American computer science education context, there's been a kind of almost hand washing that, okay, we'll teach the students some ethics and be done with it and get back to the hard problems of, you know, writing compilers, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess the problem I feel like with that is that it's often been kind of almost algorithmically taught in some ways, with a real focus on, you know, I sometimes think of as sort of ethical algorithms, right? You know, let's teach them, you know, these four, you know, ethical stances. Great. Now let's just apply them to a couple of issues. Boom, done. We've done our social duty. And so I don't think that's really enough. Like it's nothing against philosophy. It's more that I feel like that's an insufficient education. I don't know if that makes any sense, Viola.
Thank you.
Okay, Joanna, you want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to pick up a comment that I found here in the chat by Sally Wyatt. I think it is very important that as we concretely consider how to address the problems that we are in agreement about, that we do so first on the basis of the research discussion in HRI, for instance, or HCI, because these are interdisciplinary areas or multidisciplinary areas that already answer some of the questions that we've been raising here. Second, that we do so on the basis of concrete experiences with research. What we found, we came as philosophers, not as ethicists, but I'm an ontologist, as phenomenologists, ontologists, as epistemologists, people skilled in theoretical philosophy. We came to the area and discovered some of these problems here. And arrogant as philosophers are, thought that we could simply supply certain orientational tools and conceptual tools and so on. And in the course of doing research, developing applications, but also developing educational programs, we really humbled ourselves. And we realized that it is only on the basis of a mixed method approach with multiple methods that we can attack the problem. So there is so much contextuality in the development of culturally sustainable applications that I believe we need to set all biases about what a discipline can do and not do. We need to set that aside and work from concrete problems. Start with some sample start with an application and try to develop something together with the engineers in a multidisciplinary setting. And on the basis of that experience, we then need to develop some concrete proposals of how to translate that into educations. And I think this is what Sally is doing. And I thought my question actually back was whether she thought that the humanities had something to offer that the social sciences did not have to offer.
May I answer that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there are building works going on in the house next door, so there's a lot of background noise, for which my apologies. And I completely agree. I mean, I work in a faculty of social sciences and humanities, and when we developed this program, we wanted to include both, not just the social sciences, because I think you're absolutely right that the humanities have a lot to offer, not only philosophy, but also history. And I think that came up in some of the discussions as well, that there, these technologies didn't emerge, fall from outer space. I mean, they emerged as a result of a long, both a kind of technical history, but also kind of social history that means that we have the technologies that we do. And I think there's a lot to be learned from also thinking about how people kind of coped with the introduction of the printing press, the telegraph, television, many of the same promises that we had that, back then we see again with digital technology. So what can we learn from that? And I mean, our aim in this program isn't to produce programmers. I mean, our computer science friends can do that, but really people to kind of do the translation and mediation work between the kind of two. But my kind of ultimate aim is that some of those things disappear. I mean, I really liked what Randy was saying about trying to teach computer scientists more about philosophy and history and ethics and social science as well. My own experience of trying to have those discussions, I think Randy mentioned this, is, any moment not spent learning to code is a waste of a moment. Mm-hmm. And having, it's been really difficult to try and kind of say, well, look, we could also offer to your students more kind of discussions about, why do some technologies fail? There's a lot to be learned from that. And as a final remark, I mean, one of the things we're trying to do in this program, but, we're only had our second cohort, so it's still early days, is to try and set up kind of joint discussions between the computer science and data science colleagues and students with our own students to kind of try and test those things out. So, yeah, but it's interesting. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other, because I think the question of technology with society, no single discipline has an answer to this. This is very much something where we need input from all of the disciplines. None of us has a monopoly on wisdom here.
Enrico, I think Peter.
Yes. Yeah, Peter.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much for this very inspiring keynotes. I'm a bit puzzled, and I would like to ask a question probably to Randy. I couldn't agree more with you that it's necessary for us computer scientists to appreciate the methodologies from social sciences as well as philosophy, apparently. But I was a bit puzzled about your remark that HCI has already made this step, and you would like to become the whole of informatics like HCI. Maybe this was a misunderstanding, but I'm wondering what HCI is basically, for me, sort of an interface between computer science and social sciences and philosophy, which would be one model. Another model has been proposed by Johanna, saying, okay, we need interdisciplinary teams and everybody in the core science. I would follow rather an orthogonal model, like something like you have to focus on hardcore informatics, but orthogonally stay a human in the sense of thinking about your existence, and in this sense becoming a philosopher much broader than ethics as well. I think really this is a question of philosophical anthropology. In fact, this is the key field for this discussion. So I'm a bit puzzled between these different models I see here, And I'm wondering whether we can agree on one or whether we have to stay with different of them. And that's in fact a feature and not a bug. So
yeah, Randy?
Great question. Well, I'm kind of still, the HCI thing was comment was just a reflection on just a number of comments that I had gotten that from people practicing within that area saying, you know, we're already making, you know, we've always been a kind of an interface with these other disciplines. You know, you don't need to tell us. You need to, you know, convince the rest of the or the non-HCI computing people to make that step. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's I wanted to make a comment just about Johanna's permeable education. I really love that idea. I think it's a fantastic way of thinking about interfaces to other disciplines. It seems maybe a bit more suitable for faculty and research teams. I guess I'm maybe a little more I don't know if it helps with individual students per se. It's I guess I was maybe a little more interested in the micro level of that, but I think it's fantastic. You know, this idea of you know, not individuals with mixed competencies, but interdisciplinary teams. That being said, I think that there's a real tendency to overstate how much technical knowledge we need to teach within a computer science degree, right? My my teaching specialty is in web development. I've got a variety of books on that. It's what the vast majority of our CS graduates end up doing, and yet it's not part of any formal of anywhere in the formal ACM model curriculum. It's like a little optional topic that if you want to cover that, go ahead, but we don't need to. So if we think that we can produce CS graduates without covering what arguably is the most important skill they actually need, there's probably other things that we can probably slim down. I think there is room within our curriculum, computing curriculums, to broaden out to other fields. Peter, I'm not sure if I answered your question. It was a great question. I hope I have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks, Randy. Unfortunately, in spite of the highly interesting discussion, times is not relenting and is clocking as usual. So we should go to the coffee break in 1 minute. Randy, I read that you had a comment to Johanna, or you already covered it.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. That's okay. So I think we will have to deepen this question more in the future. And you know, we have a DIGHUM series where we focus each time on a single topic. I think we could go deeper into this question in the future, because I mean, I still have some question in my mind. I guess also other people have the same. So I close this panel, thanking again the three speakers for your wonderful presentation that popped a lot of questions in our brain. That is what a good speaker has to do. Thanks also to everybody that attended this session. Now we go in the coffee break. Hannes, any further announcement?
Yeah, just a final comment, and then from the organizational point of view, we have now 15 minutes break. The system will keep running because we cannot switch it off, otherwise YouTube would be broken. But you can go for a coffee, and we start at 5:30 exact time on these AI developments in Europe, which will be a very interesting discussion moderated by George Metakides. I just have a final remark. I think in computer science, we are somehow, as Randy said, we are in the trap between emperor and plumber. And I think this is a description where we should maybe start some informal group to discuss how such a curriculum could look like and how interfaces could look like in university teaching to really keep track of this, let's say, interesting question. But this is something I will write to you. And if you have some ideas, please write either to Enrico or to me so that we can continue this. Thank you very much and see you at 5:30. Bye.
Bye. See you later.
Thank you.
So it's 5:30 p.m. Thank you for coming back after the coffee break. We had a very interesting panel before. I hope you didn't only have coffee, but maybe also a glass of water or a glass of wine. I'm really looking forward to the next panel, which is on AI developments in Europe with 4 renowned, outstanding speakers. I thank them very much for participating. And I'm especially thanking George, who is organizing and moderating. Just to introduce George before handing over to him, but there's a very long CV, or you could also do it very short. I do a long one. He is adjunct visiting professor in Southampton and also in Cyprus. Beside that, he is currently president of the Digital Enlightenment Forum, which is a partner organization to us, and also advisor to several organizations. He's active in economic, political, social impact, the analysis of that, of digitalization and cybersecurity. And he's really also very active in the promotion of cooperation for a digital ecosystem, as he writes it, which respects shared human values. From the education, he has a PhD in logic from Cornell, and he has been at MIT, Cornell, and Rochester University. He was a chair of logic at the University of Patras in Greece, and then he moved to Brussels, being active in Brussels European funding research organizations and managing this. And he is well known for his directorship of the ESPRIT program. And this, if I remember correctly, George, you were also the architect of these recent programs of the European Commission. He also contributed to the establishment of several international non-profit institutions, for example, for the World Wide Web Consortia, which is well respected. And he has a number of awards and honorary degrees of several university and national academy. I am happy that you are here with us and the speakers are with us, and I hand over to you, George. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Hannes. And to get the show going. First of all, let me express publicly the wish that at our next event will be in Vienna, and physically so. And the one after that in Santorini, from where I'm speaking right now. Artificial intelligence in the broad umbrella sense, which we adopt for this panel today, as the spearhead of all current digital advances, needs no introduction, and not for this audience and not for this panel. So I will give none. I would just like to make a couple of remarks and ask some questions aimed primarily at the panelists, having read as much of what they have written that I could. I will try to aim the questions to issues that I know they have thought, written admirably and spoken about, and are very qualified to address today. So, first of all, just a bit of perspective. Just a short decade ago, the digital landscape looked wonderful. And I promised myself I wouldn't use that word after listening to Trump for the last 4 years. It looked different. It looked sunny and optimistic. Just remember, the democracy was thought as kind of blossoming after the Arab Spring, with digital technologies enabling it. And there were all kinds of wondrous applications for health and well-being of citizens sort of shining on an already visible hill. And then what happened? Then I think it was 3 years later, 2013, came the Snowden revelations. Then, of course, 2016, Cambridge Analytica, Brexit, the US elections. I think by 2020, there are voices from many different sides saying that we have a problem, okay? And we need, for example, regulation. Well, we need regulation because self-regulation alone cannot work. Okay, and then comes a rainstorm of all the hard questions. We need regulation, but how do we find the right balance between the invisible hand of the markets and the the visible hand of good governance? Where lies the right balance between technology neutrality in abstractio? It's a common thing to say that technology is neutral. Perhaps it is in its generic abstract sense. But if you look at its instantiations, it's not neutral at all, is it? If an algorithm tells a banker whether to approve a loan or not, a decision that can shape or misshape a life, is the code writer neutral? Is the set of data that the code writer used neutral? Social media have a business model and use algorithms and data that seem to connect to the worst demons in our nature. They create artificial virality. They create polarization, fear, uncertainty, lack of trust, precisely the fodder that makes some people, quite a few people, in fact, as we saw in the recent US elections, be attracted to a kind of parental authoritarianism. Now, where does Europe stand in all this? Europe has, as one of the panelists has written very extensively about, been a leader in trying to regulate some of these technologies and their main purveyors. Is this European leadership, first of all, sustainable? And secondly, perhaps more importantly, is it sufficient? Is it sufficient for Europe to stand on its own 2 feet in the evolving geopolitical context, and specifically vis-a-vis the US and China? And finally, do we need, or is it time for a sort of Geneva Convention that will look at AI enabled weapons, not just the kind that kill people, but also the kind that erode social cohesion and threaten democratic processes. I think we have today an exceptional panel whose members have thought about such questions and many others. I didn't mean to be exhaustive. I just selected some of the issues. So it's time now to give them the floor. We will do so in alphabetical order, surname alphabetical order, and I will introduce each speaker as I give the virtual floor. Every member will talk for about 10 minutes, and the rest of the time will be devoted to questions and discussion. So, to open the discussion, I would like to introduce Anna Michelle Asimakopoulou. You read her CV, and that after her serving in the Greek National Parliament, She became a very energetic member of the European Parliament, where she is, among others, a member, and very importantly, pertinently for today's panel, a member of the newly created Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence. What is not in her CV, besides her strong legal and economic background, is that she is one of the pioneers of introducing digital technologies. That was before she entered politics, in one of the poorest areas of Greece, transforming it in the process. So without further ado, I would like now to pass the floor to a lady that I consider a close and dear friend. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor. I have to tell all of you that Professor Mitakidis and I have worked together since Esprit, so that's a long time ago. So I'm delighted to be here today, and if I can figure out how to do this, there we go. And I'm particularly delighted to be in such incredible company. Here we go. Yes, yes. I'm really honored to be joined today, and thank you very much for hosting this and Professor Hannes for all the organizational work that you've done and everything to put this panel together today and to have such distinguished company. I've framed my, oops, sorry, that's right, that's the last slide. I framed my discussion based on my, let's say, prism within which I see this topic, and that's strategic autonomy. So that's why the title of my presentation today is Strategic Autonomy. Is it artificial or is it intelligent? Because that's something that we're discussing a lot. And I've tried to structure my presentation basically around the profile of these three extremely distinguished panelists that we have today: Anu Bradford, Professor of Law and International Organization at Columbia University. I know Professor Mitakidis will introduce you more extensively. And I thank you so much, Anu, for today. It's well known that I admire your work, and we've done these MEPcasts together, which have had an enormous success. Also, thank you very much to Shada Islam, who we've been on panels together, also doing fantastic work and fantastic geopolitical perspective, which I admire. And of course, Mariette Schaake, who from what I hear from everybody, was one of the most energetic MEPs when she was in Parliament, did pioneering work and continues to do so in the transatlantic context. I thank really all three of you for accepting the invitation. I know your schedules are very busy, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So I'm just going to try and frame the issue and just frame the issues and just set the scene. Professor Mitakidis threw out a couple of questions. I'm really positing some issues here. Basically, is this regulatory framework compatible with our geopolitical ambitions at the moment? Shada has written recently, if Biden does succeed in his ambition to put America back at the head of the table, a strong and self-confident Europe with its own networks of power and influence can be a real partner for America, not just a pushover. So I'm sure that we'll explore that going into the discussion. Then again, what's the right balance that Professor Mitakidis was talking about between open strategic autonomy, digital sovereignty, between regulating and upholding our principles, but at the same time making sure that we have this effect on the world. So I'm sure that Professor Bradford will tell us about the dynamic that, as she says, allows the EU to have influence on corporate behavior, transforming global markets in the process. And then what are the implications of all this AI development and deployment on our democracies? A central question. And I know I discussed this with Mariette when I was trying to find my focus in the context of my work in the AI committee. And I really hope to hear more based on her article, How Democracies Can Claim Back Power in the Digital World, which I very much enjoyed. So the strange thing for me when I started dealing with AI is that, you know, here's a definition. I've put up a definition on the board here of the white paper and also the high level expert group. But basically, though it's one of the fastest growing fields in the technology world, there's still a lot of uncertainty around, you know, what is AI exactly? I mean, I don't really know if it matters. Let's just say that for me, there's two types of definitions. One is broad and one is narrow, and I generally go with a broad one. And that's pretty much what the European Union is doing. You all know this. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff been going on for the last few years in the European Union with guidelines, with the white paper, with these communications. And the point of all this is to make the EU a leader in the AI revolution, and to do this in its own way and based on our values. Ergo, the concept of digital sovereignty, which according to Breton now has these three pillars. We have to have the computing power, we have to have control over our data, we have to have secure connectivity. And I can tell you from the perspective of Parliament, as you know, that we discuss AI in many, many committees, pretty much all of them. We've done a number of reports, as I said, most recently, I think it was a couple of weeks ago in October, we did these three own initiative reports. And now we have this committee, the Committee on Artificial Intelligence, AIDA, in the digital age, where our mission is to set up this roadmap on artificial intelligence. And I can just give you some inside information. Settled, let's say, around 6 themes, which you can see here on the board. Having added security and defense recently. So this is how we're going to work in this committee. And everywhere I go, you know, it's AI, AI, AI. That's why I've called it the flavor of the decade. And everybody's talking about AI and everybody's dealing with AI. There's a global partnership from the OECD. The US has its own initiative. China, of course, has its own plan. The Council of Europe has set up this committee. A lot of member states are prioritizing it, Germany, France, the UK. And horizontally across the board, the issues that we're focusing on are ethics and democracy. And exploring those issues and the threats to democracy listed here, from misinformation to loss of privacy to polarization, things that Professor Mitakidis mentioned are also bringing out sort of the worst in people. It's a big issue how we can claim back democracy in Mariette's sense. And I quote, today, technology regulation is often characterized as a three-way contest between the state-led systems in China and Russia, the market-driven one in the US, and a values-based vision in Europe. The reality, however, is that there are only two dominant systems of technology governments: the privatized, which applies to the entire democratic world, and an authoritarian one. So I think that facing this challenge, my conundrum is, you know, this question, you know, to regulate or not to regulate. That's the question. And for me, it's an existential question for not just for Europe, but internationally. Yes, we've done a lot of parliamentary rules, resolution, initiative reports, legislation like the GDPR and the Digital Services Act, which is coming soon. And we do so looking for this balance where we don't want to over-regulate so we stymie innovation, but at the same time, we want to distinguish between these high-risk and low-risk activities while we're chasing after technology, which is constantly evolving and mostly at a pace much faster than we can actually legislate. So in this context, it's interesting to think about how, how AI can make Europe from a rule maker to a superpower, augment this Brussels effect. And this is not just about economic power, it's about our relationship with the world. Will this, what Shada calls the great transatlantic reconciliation, which is a two-way effort, will it happen now with Biden and with Europe being threatened by a veto today from Poland and Hungary? How do you reconcile, and are we naive to think that we can have a strategic partnership with a systemic rival like China? And in the end, how do we make sure that the European model becomes the model of a leader in the digital, in what von der Leyen calls Europe's digital decade, as opposed to a playground for the rest of the world, which passes us by? So the answer, when we look through the prism of digital sovereignty, is again how we strike this balance between wanting to protect our interests but not becoming protectionist, and championing international cooperation, trade, open-mindedness, what we call multilateralism, which is part of our European identity. How do we reconcile digital sovereignty when we look at projects like Gaia X, which makes sense when you think about the fact that currently only 1% of cloud services in Europe are provided by European companies. But in the end, when they're supported by all the US companies who are joining it, might end up just being a Trojan horse for others when you keep this open to come in and continue to control Europe only from the inside this time. Now, mind you, I don't have the answers for all this, but these are just things that are really always at the forefront of my thought when I analyze this sovereignty or autonomy or resilience or whatever you want to call it. So, and for me, the objective is this: Europe has to lead by example to achieve this paradigm of technological development with less dependency on non-European digital companies and greater competition and protection of consumers. How to do that together obviously requires strategic foresight and a determination to build a resilient and competitive EU digital strategy that'll take us through. And I think that open strategic autonomy, which everybody defines a little bit differently, from #1 goal of our generation to basically resilience to securing alternatives and making sure we have choices, I think that it's the key to going forward. And I think that in what we can achieve if we have open strategic autonomy as our guide is to safeguard our interest in this increasingly tense and competitive international environment, and to properly balance our geopolitical interests, for those of us devoted to free trade economics. You lost me. I'm back.
Yeah, okay. We have you back. Please go on.
I'm sorry. So I was almost done anyway. I was saying that the Greek word for autonomy is autonomia, which comes from avtos, which means self, and nomos, which means law. And literally, it is your right to make your own rules. And I think that that's the EU way. The EU way is this human-centric approach that involves like-minded partners, and altogether we set international rules which are based on our common values. And that, for me, is what strategic autonomy is about. And I think it's not just intelligent, I think that it's existential for the future of Europe. So I look forward to your thoughts on these topics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Normally, I should have paused to wait for the round of applause, but that's something that doesn't in this meetings. Thank you in particular for so artfully setting the scene for the speakers that follow. And the next speaker is Professor Anu Bradford. She's a professor of law and international organization at Columbia Law School. And her research focuses on European Union law, inter alia, and international trade law, which fits like a glove to the European conundrum that Anna so well described of how to handle the big tech oligarchy and the AI oligarchy in today's context. She's Harvard educated, but also has a Finnish connection, as in fact she received a law degree from the University of Helsinki, and she is in Finland right now. She has written, among others, a wonderful book called The Brussels Effect, which I was lucky to read before my presentation to this very forum last May 14. This book has given the term the Brussels Effect and the substance behind it worldwide recognition. And people refer to the phrase not only in Brussels, but elsewhere. I recommend the book to all of you. She has thought extensively about Europe's worldwide role in this context, and I think she's very well equipped not only to tell you what the Brussels effect is, but also to tackle the question of what should it be complemented with, and finally, how can it be used to leverage Europe towards a better democratic society that we all want. Anu, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, George, for this kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this important conversation. So I thought that Anna Michelle's presentation was spot on, and I think gives us exactly the kind of framework for the conversation that I was hoping for. So maybe I will first open up a little bit of the term Brussels effect and what I think its contribution to this conversation is. So first, what do I mean by the term? I coined to refer to this phenomenon whereby the European Union can unilaterally regulate the global marketplace. So the EU is one of the largest and wealthiest consumer markets in the world. And there are very few international companies that can afford not to trade in the EU. So in order to provide goods and services to European consumers, these companies need to abide by the EU rules. There's nothing surprising there. What is more interesting is that typically these companies choose to extend the European regulations across their global conduct and global production in an effort to avoid the cost of complying with multiple different regulatory regimes. So companies like uniformity, and if they choose to follow the most stringent standard, which typically is the EU standard, they can accomplish that uniformity and at the same time have access to nearly all the markets around the world. So if we think about then some examples of the Brussels effect, it is certainly not limited to digital economy. We see it in various areas of consumer protection, environmental protection, whether we talk about food safety, chemical regulation, or you name it. But in the digital economy, I think the prime example that often gets mentioned is the regulation of data protection, so privacy. And the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, has really become the gold standard worldwide. So if we think about some of the most powerful technology companies in the United States, companies like Facebook or Google or Apple or Microsoft, they follow a single privacy policy, and it mirrors the GDPR. They don't just follow it in the EU, but across the board. Then if we think about hate speech online, companies like, again, Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, when they decide what kind of speech they take down from their platforms, they are not guided by the First Amendment of the American Constitution that embraces a very broad notion of free speech. They are more closely aligned with the European definition of hate speech after having signed this voluntary code of conduct by which they have agreed to the European framework. So these are just some of the examples of where we see the European Union law penetrate the global marketplace. And if we think about that as an element of power or influence, it is really a narrative that counters this idea that Europe is not capable of influencing the state of the affairs in the world. And in particular, I argue in the book that regulatory power is the kind of power that is it makes Europe very influential. Because if we think about more traditional notions of power, like military power, those are very costly to leverage. Whereas the Brussels effect is something where all the EU needs to do is to regulate the single market. It is then the market logic, the forces of the markets and the self-interest of the companies that transport those EU rules across the global marketplace. So the EU does not need to impose any standards on anybody, nor is it dependent on the cooperation of foreign governments to agree to abide by the EU rules and adopt those into their legislative frameworks. Often that happens too. And we've seen, for instance, the GDPR become the template, not just for the companies, but governments around the world, where we have around 130 countries with the domestic data protection regulation. Most of those very closely resemble the GDPR. So these are some examples of the regulatory power that the EU possesses globally. And now the one question is, what is the next frontier of this? And obviously AI will be one of the issues on the table where the EU is seeking to see whether it can also shape the global regulatory framework when it comes to many of these new technologies. So we all awaiting the Commission unveiling the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act. There's a lot going on in the European institutions that will be shaping the regulatory environment. And I think it is too early to say how much the Brussels effect will be deployed, however passively, as the tool to extend those regulatory frameworks outside of the EU as well. But that is obviously something where I expect this theory to potentially fit in and explain part of the leverage that the EU will have. But let me now move on to the question that I think George asked us to think about in the beginning, was whether this regulatory power is sufficient. And my answer would be that it is significant, but that alone is not sufficient. It is something that the EU can build on. So I remember when I was doing a book tour in Brussels and talking about this, somebody said to me that, well, the worst thing that can happen is that now you introduce this sense of complacency, whereby the EU thinks, well, we have it, we are powerful, we don't need to do much. And that certainly would be a very unfortunate negative effect of the book, because I think in many ways what I hope to invite with the book is this greater confidence that the EU feels that it is not at the mercy of the others, it is a player. And given that you can control the rules of the game, you really want to get into that game as well. The odds are not necessarily stacked against you. You can influence the environment within which the competition for technology proceeds. So in many ways, I think what the EU has successfully done thus far is that it has been the referee in this game. But I've argued that the EU needs to also get on the field. It needs to play offense and defense, and it needs to be more assertive. But it should feel comfortable undertaking that role, given that it already has say over the rules. So I really like the way that Anna Michelle was framing this question about strategic autonomy and adding the word open, because here comes the question of how will the EU then play defense and offense? And my biggest fear would be that we are just trying to geopoliticize the Brussels effect in the way that we are trying to deploy it towards the goals that no longer serve the values and the goals of the European Union. And when I say that I would like the EU to be more assertive, I want the EU to be assertive and at the same time abide by the values of openness and cooperation. And that, I think, is a much safer and more sustainable path towards the strategic autonomy than the one built on the idea of, for instance, protectionism. So here, I think the EU needs to build its own capabilities. And the best way to do that is that we need to think about the set of laws, set of principles and policies that we have in place. And in the interest of time, I just want to mention a few of those, but not go into any of the details with the hope that we can open them up in our conversation. So one, where we are, for instance, behind the United States is funding all these key innovations. So we need to complete the Capital Markets Union. Where we are all behind is that the cost of failure are so high in Europe. We need to rewrite our bankruptcy laws in a way that allow for our entrepreneurs and innovators fail and yet try again and be successful. And then one that I personally feel extremely strongly about is that we need to find a way to proactively invite the best of the global talent to Europe. So we need to have a proactive immigration policy that really tries to harness and replicate what the United States has done so successfully. All that talent in the United States is not homegrown. If you look at how much of the innovation is done by migrants, I think that is part of the roadmap that also will pave a way towards greater open strategic autonomy in Europe. I think you muted, George.
Yes, I forgot to unmute myself. Sorry. And okay, virtual, very virtual round of applause. Thank you, and thank you for the recommendations of what could complement the leverage that regulation provides. I mean, Archimedes said when he discovered the leverage principle, give me a place to stand and I shall move the earth. So Europe has the lever of regulation, but needs also a place to stand. And the issues that you mentioned are providing at least part of that place. We'll come back at the question period. So our next panelist is Shada Islam, who is a visiting professor at the College of Europe and a Solvay Fellow at the Free University of Brussels. She is also a member of the Strategic Council of the European Policy Center and runs her own Brussels-based global strategy media company. I could tell from our chat in preparation for this panel how passionately she feels about social inclusion, both at the local and global levels, and also about Europe getting its act together so that Europe can stand on its own feet in the emerging geopolitical context, which she's studying very carefully. Generally, and vis-a-vis the United States and China in particular, I strongly recommend her rather recent Politico article, Europe, do not let Biden clip your wings, where the message is that, you know, just because Trump is gone, if he's gone, it doesn't mean that Europe should stray away from trying to do all the things that Anu, for example, mentioned before. So, dear Shada, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, George, and thank you very much, Anna Michelle, for bringing me into this very, very important conversation. Am I muted?
No, it's perfect. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. So as George was saying, I mean, this event stands at the intersection of three of my passions, which are geopolitics, sustainable development, Agenda 2030, and also very much the question of inclusion, both internally in our societies, Black Lives Matter issues, but also on a global level. Anna Michelle and Anu have both, I think, in a very well-articulated way and really zeroed in on the challenges and the dilemmas we face in this new world, this AI-dominated world. About geopolitics, George, it used to be a fairly simple world. You know, I've taken part in many, many conversations where everyone talks about the new disorder. So I'm quite amused at this because obviously when you're in Europe and you're part of a transatlantic alliance and you're sort of, you know, best friends with the big boys, it is a very orderly world. But for the rest of the world, like other countries, part of this global community, it wasn't always very orderly. So there was a lot of messiness and conflicts, hot wars being fought, proxy wars being fought. So it was a tough world. And the last 4 years obviously have really disrupted and shaken up people across the world. And it's not just Europe, I think, that's learning to stand on its own 2 feet, however gingerly it's doing it. I think a number of countries everywhere are doing it. And you saw today, or yesterday rather, this enormous mega trade agreement that was signed in Asia, the RCEP agreement, which was led by Japan. China's part of it, Association of Southeast Asian Countries also. So, you know, countries across the world have learned that the US doesn't matter as much as they thought it did, and we can move on. Now, the world is going to get very tough because, I mean, just listen to what Vladimir Putin has said last year. Everyone, he said, should watch carefully because he who can establish monopoly in artificial intelligence will rule the world. Now, a number of countries have listened to this, and we can look at the list later, but more and more countries are actually developing. And, you know, I'm not just talking about the Chinas of this world, but others are also, Malaysia, India, others are also doing the same thing. So with data also now being sort of defined as the world's most valuable resource, the big battles, and we talked about this, George, the big battles are going to be over access to data. I mean, that is going to be the resource. We used to say the oil for an artificial intelligence, but it's really an infinite resource. And we're all part of this machine, as you so well said to me. So the competition has already begun, and my concern really, and I think Anu and Anne-Michelle pointed out to this, is where are we as Europeans going to be in this new geopolitical competition, this AI competition? Are we going to be faced once again with a binary choice, as we have been under the Trump years, between America and China, the AI duopoly, if you like? Or can we be self-confident and autonomous? And when we compete on our terms. But when we partner and we cooperate, we also don't do it in a timid fashion, but as Anu said, with self-confidence and our heads held up high. And for that to happen, it's really quite a mindset issue. We really have to, and Anu said it as well, and it's always interesting that we're all of us always telling the EU in different ways, be more self-confident, believe in yourself. You are more powerful than you think you are. And the EU has been learning to come out of America's shadow. And as Anna Michelle said, the open strategic autonomy debate is very much part of this struggle for independence, if you like. And whenever I speak to my colleagues across the world, people are noticing this change in Europe. It's not something that is under the radar of the global community. India, which was really sort of quite cold-shouldered towards the European Union, for instance, is now really actively embracing and courting the European Union. So are many African countries, and so are many Asian countries. So this Brussels effect was always there, Anu, and you're very right. I mean, this has been the power, the smart power of Europe. But now they see a more, if you like, a more autonomous in other ways as well, a Europe that can actually come out of the shadow and make itself clear. So the world is watching very carefully. Some of the actions that we're taking now at the EU level are obviously meant to stand up to China's power, China's economic power, especially. So we're talking about beefing up our trade enforcement measures, investment screening, action against unfair government subsidies. The European Climate Green Deal, also creating waves across Europe. Some of it is, of course, as always in the beginning, concern. And it's something that I think Europe needs to get better at, is actually communicating better and making clear that this is not going to lead to protectionism. There are concerns. So the Green Deal is there. And as I said earlier, this open strategic autonomy. Once again, these debates in our democracies are very open, very public. Everyone listens into them. Everyone reads Politico and the Financial Times. And you see all the contradictions in many of our conversations. So once again, uncertainty being created and a real fear across the world that we could go protectionist. And I think those messages need to be sent out now, that this is going to be a very open strategic autonomy and not as some would like, but the reality is that some do want it as an excuse for protectionism. So it's quite reassuring, I think, that these conversations have started. And as Anu has said, all of these conversations on 5G, you know, whether or not we use Huawei, they make the headlines across the world. Now we're talking about Gaia X, data localization of personal data, industrial data, creating this European cloud, a single data market, all of these conversations. And we sometimes forget it because we're so sort of sometimes insular. We sometimes forget that we're making headlines across the world with what we do here. And that's also a sign, I think, a reflection of the fact that Europe does matter. Now, of course, I've talked about the competition, but where Europe also matters, and George, you referred to it, is that geopolitics, and I'm very passionate about that, is not only about competition. It's also about cooperation. It can be benign competition, but it's also bringing countries together, banging heads together, so that we're not always at loggerheads, and that we put humanism, as you said, and humanity ahead of our national or regional interests. And there, I think the EU has credibility in working and building alliances around the use of AI, and we've seen that in G20, in the OECD, UNESCO, etc. And you talked about a Geneva Convention on AI. Why not? EU taking the leadership. Some are talking about AI trade organization, a new WTO. Well, you know, why not sow the seeds for something like that? So as we go forward, of course, the questions are going to be about better regulation and, you know, the balance, the safeguarding of interests, etc. Let me go very quickly, George, to the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. Now, here again, I mean, these we tend to, in our circles, sort of, I would say a little bit minimize the importance of these SDGs, but across the world, countries are really acting very quickly and very deeply to try and meet these SDGs, these 17 SDGs. And there, of course, AI will be very, very important. And the development implications of leapfrogging into a stronger and more rapid growth paradigm, development paradigm, fighting climate change, these are all going to be very important. And I think I would urge Ursula von der Leyen, when she talks about Africa and development, that she also points to the leadership that we can show on SDGs. Very quickly on inclusion and something that I think is important for us when we talk about creating societies. Yes, I'm coming to an end, George. It's also about AI and how it can empower our minorities. And, you know, we've seen this with refugees and migrants coming into Europe, how they have used AI for better integration. And finally, I'll say, you know, we're talking about a partnership with Africa, and we're talking about a digital partnership with Africa. This is very important because GDPR that Anu has talked about, I think we can set the standards for that in Africa, because that's where there is really very little regulation at the moment. And the data that's available in Africa is being sucked up and used by companies without any protection or safeguards. So once again, there as well, I think in this geopolitical world, Europe will matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for putting things in this geopolitical context for which I know you have been thinking and writing for a long time, and it is necessary to put these technologies in this context. So to complete the presentations of this panel, we have Marietje Schaake, who at the same time exemplifies, personifies the exceptional quality of this panel. She is International Policy Director at Stanford University Policy Center, International Policy Fellow at Stanford's Institute of Human-Centered AI, and President of the Cyber Peace Institute, as well as a regular contributor to the Financial Times. And I can concur to her the description that was given earlier by Anna Michel as how an influential member of the European Parliament she has been. I visited her together with Tim Berners-Lee in sometime in 2015, I think, to lobby her on our knees for using her influence to support net neutrality. That was a kind of a burning topic at the time. I strongly recommend her recent article in the MIT Review entitled "How Democracies Can Claim Back Power in the Digital World." Marietje, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. And it's great to be among you all. It feels a little bit like I'm back in Europe, which is always nice, besides being online perpetually, as we all are these days. I decided to just say a few words because I think so many very, very powerful points have been made by all the speakers that it's now time to get to Q&A. And I see some virtual hands raised, so I want to make sure that the participants can get their thoughts in. But just a couple of thoughts. I think it's really important that we are not too deterministic about what technology will bring. Nothing is inevitable. Remember the promise with which Silicon Valley brought about mobile technology and social media platforms, and how along with their spread across the world, liberalizing effects would go viral. It didn't happen. The survival of democracy is not inevitable either, and I don't think that China will inevitably win the race for AI dominance either. So the focus I would like to add is one, governance, who gets to decide and with which legitimacy. It is entirely clear now that connectivity and a technological advantage does not only lead to global dominance or superiority in some kind of race, but that connectivity also brings along new vulnerabilities in the space of cybersecurity, in the space of democracy. In the US, 138 million people saw claims of electoral theft on YouTube alone since the day of the elections. The person, Steve Bannon, still remains active on Facebook despite having suggested the beheading of both Dr. Fauci and the FBI chief. Now, imagine a Black or Muslim person making such suggestions. So it really does matter who gets to decide on which rules and regulations are set, whether commercial interests lead or the rule of law leads in their motivations. And I'm convinced, unfortunately, I say this with no pleasure, but I truly dread the battle for trust and truth around the COVID vaccine, which I fear will be the worst disinformation war the world has ever seen. Thank you for mentioning some of the articles that I wrote. Indeed, one of my core concerns is that too much power and agency has been left to technology companies, both in Europe and the US, and in fact, across the democratic world. And I think it has gone at the expense of the rule of law and democracy. While I agree entirely with Anu's proposition of the Brussels effect, I think that the qualification of the EU as a super regulator of technology is not quite earned yet. And it's important that the EU also focuses with equal ambition on how it wishes to realize growth beyond the regulation of companies and other markets. And even in the regulatory space, I think it's important to recognize that others are not sitting still. We recently saw China stepping in with its own privacy, antitrust, and other regulatory efforts. So a few points that I think the EU should focus on, and then I'll be happy to make this more interactive. One, it desperately needs to overcome its geopolitical ambitions and match it with the promise of a digital single space or a digital single market. The Huawei 5G network technology example really showed the enormous tension between the promise of one single market with a level playing field for whichever company wishes to enter, and 27 different national security considerations. So if we look at the transatlantic space, wouldn't it be helpful if the EU took some of the national security realism from the US, and the US would take some of the values and rights-based vision for tech governance from Europe? That, I think, would lead to a pretty good mix. And hopefully both can align again and understand what is happening globally. That democracy is under pressure not only at home, but also in the global context. So what I am really optimistic and hopeful about is the promise of the now President-elect Biden and his transition team to organize a democracy summit to put digital governance on top of the agenda. And hopefully from there, we can think more globally about democratic alliance, putting democracy first and looking at what is needed to preserve democracy as technology continues to disrupt. And this is a big ambition. I appreciate it. I think for both the US and the EU, the domestic challenges and frictions remain significant. But the net result may well be that as political battles rage on and checks and balances in the political system continue, the private sector yet again benefits from the inability to move quickly, both in the US and the EU. I hope not, but I think that this may actually unfold this way. I'll leave it there and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariette. And to your last comment, Yuval Harari has said that democracy is like a rare, gentle flower. To blossom, it needs care, it needs effort. It doesn't grow like a weed, and we need to join into that effort. So it's time for questions. We have about 15 minutes, but our boss, Hannes, informed me that we can run over time by, let's say, 5 or 10 minutes before the real music starts. The real music, because I can tell you that during the talks, someone wrote that the message from one of the panelists was like music to his ears, but there will be some actual real music at the end. So, questions. The first hand raised, I was told, was by Nida Romelin.
Yes, thank you. I hope that I can be heard. Okay. To be short and rude, I very much agree with the goals we hear from European institutions about strategic sovereignty on the digital camp, the human-centric approach to AI, and so forth. I very much agree with that. But I don't see the concrete measures that brings us there. And I think it's years that we have seen now that till now there is no efficient strategy in sight. And so at least one remark, and I would be glad to hear some answers from the European perspective. I think we have to change the rules of the game. If it is not possible on the global level, then at least on the European level. And the key element of it must be, on my account, the misuse of personal data for marketing strategies that is part of the Silicon Valley business model. This can be changed by juridical measures quite easily, but we don't do it. And even in the US, if I have seen it rightly, there is a discussion about changing the rules of the game. So I would be glad to hear your opinion on that topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to say that future persons that want to ask a question, could they also kindly identify themselves? The previous question asker was, if I understand well, a philosopher from Munich, and a well-known one at that.
Who has written a book on digital humanism.
Okay. Yes, you have. So, to the panel, who would like to take to respond to this? Perhaps Anu or Marietje? Anna?
Anna, do you want to go first? Because I think there was a real invitation to comment on this from the European institutions perspective. I'm happy to go as well, but
Sure. I'll be short and sweet. Sure, you can regulate this, but there's a lot of tension on where the line is and where the line of putting this responsibility is on, and that's the battle. People in battles, you have to take sides, and you have to decide what your guiding principle is. And if your guiding principle is democracy and protection of basic values and rights, then you draw the line closer to regulating much more forcefully. And if your values are different, and you draw the line in a different place. That's the battle that's going on right now. And a lot of that is going on in the Digital Services Act. So I think in the next few months, you'll have some answers to where this comes out, at least majority-wise in Parliament. And I think it's going to be, the line is going to shift much more in favor of liability and accountability than it was in the past. I'm not saying all the way, but I think it's going in that direction.
And maybe, George, I can add just from just today's news on, we have a report from European Court of Audit taking a critical look of what the EU has failed to accomplish through competition laws in this space. And what we also seeing as a result, reflection and admission that what has been done is not working. The remedies are not enough. And redrafting the regulations and giving the institutions new tools. So that's going to be part of the Digital Markets Act and the new competition tool, where we're really trying to ex ante influence the structure of these markets. So I think in that sense, when I see that the institutions are constantly engaging in evaluation and reassessment of which regulations are working, which are not, I take comfort in that process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anu. Eric, do I see a hand?
Yes, thank you. Very much in response to what has just been said. Currently, of course, we see the trend is a little bit in the other direction by forcing companies to, for example, be very strict about what's happening in online discourse. We actually make them use much more artificial intelligence than perhaps we want to. I mean, this is problematic for many reasons. One very European reason is that these algorithms are maybe, so they all are bad, as I can say that, I'm an AI researcher. But secondly, they are even worse for some minority languages. While they may be kind of okay for English, they are terrible for Basque. They practically don't work. But by forcing the large platforms to remove hate speech and other things, we practically make them use more AI. So I think there is a societal problem here.
That's an interesting point.
Okay. Who would like it's definitely true. I mean, all you have to do is go to Google and put something in Turkish where there is the articles are, there's no masculine or feminine, huh? and then you get things like she is lazy and he is hardworking. When you use oh, which is, it's no he or she. So there's this bias all over the place when you go to other languages. Who would like to respond to that, or what to do about it from the panel? Okay, perhaps we go to the next.
Can I very quickly maybe just mention, I think it is an important point, Eric, and I'm glad you raised it. The question is, though, what is the alternative and the feasibility, that even if we agreed with the criticism, I don't know whether human moderation of content at the scale is feasible. And there's also very disturbing reports of how the human moderation exploits those who do the moderation in some parts of the developing world, what psychological consequences it has. So I'm just highlighting, I recognize and agree the problem, but I think we just haven't had yet an alternative that wouldn't introduce a different set of problems.
Thank you. Do I see another hand, or am I missing Hannes? I see both of Hannes's hands.
Both of my hands. First of all, thanks for the excellent talks. But what we are talking in essence is that Europe has missed somehow the development of the platform economy. So this is in really the essence. No, there are these huge platform companies from the US which have this economic as well as political and also definition power. And the issue is, could AI be used to interfere with this development? What would be the role of AI of changing the rules of the game, not only from a, let's say, legal point of view, because we have many excellent lawyers, but the issue is on the development and on the innovation and the research side. So could AI be a game changer with this respect? For example, I have read a paper by Linda Hartmann, where she's listening to publications, good publications number worldwide, and Europe is leading there. For example, Europe has good AI researchers. What we are really missing is the way to the innovation. So the question is, to make it short, could AI be used as a game changer with respect to this sovereignty and worldwide competition on the platform economy?
Okay, to the panelists. I think Mariette would like to respond first.
Yes, thank you. I mean, there are a lot of lists of figures comparing the EU, the US, and China. If you look at patents filed, PhDs recognized, Europe does not look so well. So I think the EU would be best served by not being complacent, not self-congratulating, even if it has the GDPR, even if it has all kinds of strategies. And I think actually, if we look now, the bulk of measures and efforts are still in the pipeline. So also to the first question by the philosopher, Julian, in terms of, can the EU deliver on the nice words and the proposals? I think the next couple of years will be crucial. There's a data strategy, there's a digital market strategy, there's a democracy in the context of digital plan, there's an AI strategy, there's antitrust updating efforts going on. So I think the tipping point is ahead of us, but the sense of direction to focus more on the public interest, to be more cooperative and less fragmented when it comes to artificial intelligence are all signs in the right direction. Now, politics are everywhere, right? Unfortunately. So there will be a lot of arm wrestling about what the right outcomes will be. There will be particularly trouble, I think, in bringing some of the member state capitals on board. I didn't mention national security and the promise of a digital single market without reason. The potential is enormous. The need, I would say, is enormous for Europe to act more as a global player. But you still have, think about Budapest or Warsaw, who are slamming the brake whichever opportunity they get, and it won't be any different with AI. So I think Europe should be a little bit more outward-looking instead of inward-looking, and try to indeed speed up this translating from a promise to a reality in all fields. I think it's possible.
Perhaps another panelist. I think Anna Michelle would like to respond.
Yeah, thank you. I share what Marietta is saying. I think that when we look at Europe going forward, especially after the pandemic that just hit us, which, okay, in some senses, it seemed to make us more willing to unite in the sense that we had to sort of overcome the fact that health was a national competency and actually do some things that were in that realm. But then you have this strategic autonomy, which people are, as I think Shada said this, people are trying to exploit it in a more protectionist nature. So the question is, what could be a field which would help us as Europe integrate more, protect ourselves more, become more autonomous, but continue to be open? And it certainly isn't defense, for example, because that's just an impossible thing. So I think in that sense, AI may be an opportunity because it could be a field where we actually cooperate internationally, bridge the gap, as Marietta said, between our value-based approach and a more realistic national security approach, even with China, and find this kind of a middle ground. In that sense, AI, I think, presents an opportunity at the moment in this digital world where somebody just pressed the fast forward button because of COVID. So maybe that'll be a place where the Brussels bubble will move a little bit more quickly. Maybe I don't have the depth of experience legislatively that Marietta has, but I do see, willingness to pick up the pace and actually come to some decisions. Now, whether that'll happen or not, we'll see in the next couple of years, as Anu said.
That's very thought-provoking. I mean, if AI could in fact be used to leverage a move of Europe towards getting its act together on defense matters, that would be not a Hamiltonian moment, but a kind of super Hamiltonian moment. But let us hope that some of the most senior participants here will still be alive when that happens. Do I see any hands before I ask a question that I have? Okay, I have one question to, like you say, any of the panel members that would like to take it. There is this thought around about kind of some global standard setting about the code of conduct on AI, what to do and what not to do, what is allowed, what is not allowed, in the model of the Geneva Convention, with a strong, definite article. But I seem to recall that the Geneva Convention was not created by governments. It was created by the Red Cross, and then kind of governments were dragged in almost reluctantly. How do you see something like that happening today?
Can I come in on that, George? So I think on this issue that you've talked about, international collaboration, drawing up a code of conduct, etc. We're so in Brussels at the moment, so focused on the 20th century challenges of reforming the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And I think what we really need are think tanks and people like Mariette and others to really push the European Union to be looking beyond internal regulations, which are very, very important, but to look beyond our own frontiers and to think globally. Now, I like the idea that Mariette has put forward and, of a democratic alliance, democracies working together. But I have two concerns about that. My first concern really is there's such a pushback against democracy in so many parts of the world. I find it very difficult at this time to mention more than maybe 2 or 3 countries with which we really share values and where we can work on issues like AI going forward, setting the standards for the rest of the world. So I worry about that. And my second fear about it is really fragmenting a world which is already in heading towards two blocks, and then watching while others, Africans or other countries, fall between these cracks. So I worry, and that's why I would rather, in my way, in geopolitical terms, really work on international collaboration, including, and you're very right to bring that up, civil society. And there, I think the real issue now I worry about is that with Joe Biden in place, we may fall back into that lazy pattern of looking the other side to Washington and say, you take the lead and then we'll follow. No, this is not the time for that. With AI, we should be in the lead and setting out our ambitions and aspirations.
Thank you, Shada. Any other last words from any of the panelists before we move to the music? Apparently not. So let me. Can you all just switch your mics on and try to give a real hand of applause to the panel? See if that works. Never done this before. Put your mics on. Thank you.
Systems are broken now.
So thanks to the members of the panel. Thanks to all of you attending. Hannes, up to you now.
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion, and I think it's a really timely issue, and I think we need to continue from that in our discussion, but not only to speak, but also to act, and I think this is now also time to act on this respect. Before handing over to Peter Knees and Erich Brehm, I just want to remember that tomorrow we have the second, the third and the fourth panels. We have one panel on resilience and sustainability with Edward Lee from Berkeley, Moshe Wadi from Rice, and Eric Massenet from the University of Santa Barbara. This is moderated by Sally Wyatt from the Maastricht University. And then we have international initiatives with Viola Schiafonatti from Politecnico, Milano, Marcel Brösma from the University of Groningen, Michelle Elam from Stanford, and Paul Timmers from the Digital Enlightenment Forum, moderated by Carlo Gezzi. We start again at 4 o'clock, and I think we will have two very interesting panels as it was today. And now it's Peter's time with Erich to play the piece of music. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you also. And as always, I have the privilege of introducing our final notes. And it was mentioned before, today we have a very special treat, which is a live performance by our very own Erich Brehm. And he's going to play Etude number 2 by Philip Glass. Mete, can you maybe share the screen and make sure we have this all set up? Perfect. So yeah, as always, it's my role here to transition you to the rest of the day. And with this bit of, I would say, digital renaissance of house music, in this case, we're going to end the first workshop day. Enjoy the rest of the day and see you tomorrow at the same time, whatever 4 p.m. CET is in your time zone. Erich, take it away.
Philip Glass, Etude number 2.
So
Wonderful.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Erich, it was great.
Bye-bye.
Yes,
Erich,
thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Don't stop.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Tomorrow at 4.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you for the wonderful music. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.